Yes, you're very welcome along to Team 33 here in Off the Ball. I'm Enda Coll. Coming up on tonight's show, I'll be joined by Adam Pope from the BBC as we talk about Leeds United and their struggles this year and a potential takeover by the 49ers off the NFL, of course. First, though, it was the final night of the Champions League group stages during the week. All four English sides progressed to the last 16. But the big story is that Barcelona have been knocked out. They finished third in their group after a 3-0 thrashing from Bayern Munich during the week. Arthur OD is on the line with me to discuss. Arthur, hello.
How are you?
Very well. Another Champions League night. It's always a strange night, the final night of the group stages, because a lot of the games are dead rubbers. But there were some nice little narratives going on during the week. You know, COVID situations, snowstorms, and in the middle of Europe, Barcelona battling it out against Bayern Munich to save their spot in the Champions League. Obviously, came up short, but the English sides once again come up as the main conversation during the week because all four of them have now progressed to the Champions League last 16. Liverpool, Man City, United topping their groups. Chelsea dropping down to second after a poor result against Zenit St. Petersburg, but it didn't really matter in the end. They still go through. We had Gabriel Mercati on the show on Wednesday night on Off the Ball, discussing sort of the dominance of English football within Europe these days. And the idea behind it was the fact that, you know, Liverpool had essentially a B team. They made 8 changes going into the game against AC Milan, and they just completely dominated them throughout the entire game. And it was almost a stark reminder of AC Milan, right? They are currently one of the best sides in Serie A, and they just got absolutely dominated by Nat Phillips and the lads for Liverpool. So it was sort of a strange situation. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on the general idea of how far ahead England and the English teams are from the rest of Europe at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, yeah, it seems pretty conclusive. It's interesting you mentioned that thing, that the situation in Milan, and it's like, it feels like it's quite a recurring trend here that every time anything comes up with Liverpool, anything, bring it back to United. But if you bring it back to United under Ferguson in that kind of pomp era, and you think again of some of the games that they won with relative ease when, like, you had like maybe 2-3 normal starters and then you had players brought in. So like I remember distinctly that semi-final, funnily enough, the semi-final of the Champions League when they bet Schalke and they hammered Schalke, I'm pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure, I should have checked before, I'm pretty sure like Darren Gibson was either starting or scored that night. But you kind of get that point where you go through some of those teams, you're like, Jesus, remember that team as well that everyone kind of talked about that bet Arsenal in the FA Cup? You're like, that 11, it's like, God almighty, like that's not, and that's still a good enough Arsenal team. So my overall point with that is that with the Liverpool thing, it's like, yeah, it wasn't their strongest 11 playing against them, but I do think that when a team is going as well as they're going, a lot of people can rise to the level. It's not like it's not necessarily a true kind of thing. Like if you want to look at it as sort of a depleted or really kind of second string squad, you look at that team Man United played last night.
Yeah.
Like that's, you don't like, I find it hard to call Liverpool a second string squad when you still have Alisson in goal, you still have Salah starting. You see, like it is and it isn't. Like a lot of people will rise to that level. But your question of dominance, yeah, I mean, I think now I'm interested in your point of view in this because I think you're instinctively resistant to that idea simply because it is the Premier League we're talking about and the hype around it. Mm. So I'm pretty sure that's where you're going to start off with.
Yeah. Look, I'm not naive. I do see the reality of the situation where Man City topped their group, Liverpool topped their group, United topped their group. You know, there's been a double English final, 2 times in the last 5 years. England have been, generally quite strong in Europe, but I think you have to take a more broader outlook at the situation here. And the situation is that in the top leagues in Europe, because I think there's 2 sort of arguments here. The argument is that either England is the dominant, league in Europe, or it's the most competitive league in Europe, and that's where everyone wants to play it. There's 2 sort of separate arguments going on there. The first, I would argue that, England isn't dominant more than any other league when it comes to European football, because Real Madrid are the kings of Europe. Bayern Munich are as good as any of those English sides. And granted, yeah, the Serie A you can almost not write off, but you can definitely put it to the side for the time being. It does go in peaks and troughs, but also the reality is that the Premier League is the richest league in the world. So the most obvious correlation between success and what is going on is the wage bill. That's that's pretty much conclusive based on studies that have been done. The higher the wage bill, the more likely you are to have success. English teams have the highest wage bills. They're more likely to have success. And then the third thing I would say on that is that Pep Guardiola, Thomas Tuchel, Jurgen Klopp, 3 best managers in the world, the 3 best clubs in England, the 3 most dominant teams in Europe. It's quite simple when you look at it that way.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was just thinking about there beforehand, like when you take those 3 particularly, and so between them before coming to the job they're currently in, all 3 had been, at least, like, obviously Guardiola had 1, 2, and Klopp and Tuchel had both been to a Champions League final with other teams. Like it really is the kind of, and even now, like in United situation is unique, but like as the 4th team in there, you still have Rangnick, his career is obviously a bit different, but he's still been to a Champions League semi-final with another team. And it's kind of, I think that if you really drill down into this, there's nothing, I don't know, it's like not shaky ground, but there's very little English about the English Premier League in strict terms of that. Like it's not, and I was talking, funnily enough, like in the office to Phil Egan during the week about this, and we're kind of still going across, like it's still, I think it's still 1991 is the last time an English coach won the Premier League or the Premiership or whatever, which is it. That is like, imagine, you could never imagine that happening in Germany, Italy, anywhere, Spain. Like it's just it really does seem like something's been kind of traded off. So if you want to have that kind of dominance, and English teams have the dominance, but you're trading off something else. This isn't the strength of English football, really. It's the strength of, as you're saying, like it's money in English football, and and a relative spread of it. Not through any sort of sense of equality or fairness, but just a lot of money happens to have come in, and it's just been spread out. So you have, like, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool may as well be in any country in the world. Like there's nothing distinct about it. It's just fortunate that England is where this money has come into.
Yeah, it's the best marketed league in the world, and that's just how it happened to fall. And the European aspect to the Premier League is quite interesting because it is also the most global league in the world as well. It's very un-English, you would actually say, because like in Germany you've obviously got the 50+1 rule, the distinctive German feel to it. The Spanish side, some Spanish sides still have rules against buying players from outside of the regions. If you look at the Basque clubs in particular. Whereas England is just free for all. It's pure on capitalism. That's what the Premier League is. It's embraced the capitalistic world that we live in, and success has followed, but to the detriment of the smaller clubs in England, you would argue. The other side that I do take issue with, I actually don't have any resistance to admitting that Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea are 3 of the best teams in the world right now, because they are. My issue is when I firmly believe that the Premier League is no better than the La Liga or Bundesliga, or maybe it is compared to the Serie A when it comes to the spread of the quality throughout the league. Because a lot of people will say the Premier League is the most competitive league in the world, which it is to an extent, but also the three teams that we named there, Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City, they're the 3 most dominant teams in the league for the last decade. Before that, you had Man United, Arsenal, and Chelsea as well. Realistically, over the last 20, 25 years, there have been 4 teams that have been competing for the league title. And generally it is between 2 and the best of the rest. If you take Liverpool, Man City's rivalry over the last couple of years, take United, Chelsea's rivalry, take United, Arsenal's rivalry, generally it's the best 2 and the best of the rest follow. And I would say that's exactly how every other league in Europe has run as well. If you take Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Dortmund, or Bayern Munich, Mönchengladbach, depending on who's competing, it's one very good team, a second very good team, and then the rest are quite good, but not much better than everyone else.
Yeah, I don't know now. I don't like. It depends, like how many degrees you want to go with it. Like if you look at, like, geez, I don't think as many people would be tuning into the Premier League week in week out if it was a case like where are Bayern going for their 10th in a row? Did I mishear that?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
Juve have slipped up only by their own doing. I mean, that's their own fault, and it looks like they'll be back sooner rather than later anyway. And then you kind of, yeah, Barca Real kind of share between themselves, and Atletico Madrid got in twice. But yeah, like the other questions, it's very, very hard to know. Like, how do Sampdoria get on against Brighton? I don't know.
yeah.
I
Well, you
have
see,
no
that's the
idea.
question. You need to put these sides up against each other, because I don't know. Nobody's going to tell me that watching Burnley against Southampton is any more entertaining than watching Levante take on, I don't know, Getafe.
For sure.
It's there's very good sides, and then there's okay sides, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the way the league's run.
I suppose like what I'd be interested in, and it's very interesting you take now all the kind of the German model. It almost becomes a case now of it like not even like who's producing, so who are producing the, like when it comes down to that. So say like I don't know, and we really are just hypothesizing, but say you take Sampdoria and Brighton, and Sampdoria will forgive me, I don't know who's in charge, but it strikes me that in a situation like that, it's going to come down to who probably is the better coach, or who kind of has the better in that regard, like who can outmatch in that regard. So it strikes me then you kind of come back to that issue with managers in England. It always, I think a big issue is the fact that, and maybe they'll change it, because it's certainly changed from the players' point of view. Like their development of players now is incredible, but like you're still looking that they're still having to bring in coaches to kind of get the most out of these teams that are there. Like, and that's kind of, that's all that it's not that it bothers me. It's like you want kind of the best people there, and it's amazing. Like if you're watching the Premier League now and you see the coaches that we're getting to see work are literally like the best in the world by a mile. Like, and like the coach of Real Madrid is the ex-Everton boss. the previous coach of Barcelona is the ex-Everton boss. It's like you're kind of, that part is fantastic, but I imagine in the long term it's probably an issue. It's an issue for English football. Like even like it's just, that has to be, surely you want to have managers in a position who are from, just like the way we take such joy now in the fact that Stephen Kenny's the Ireland manager, and like, whoa,
Yeah.
like there's like not we, like we developed this guy, like he developed amongst us, and now he's taken on the thing where it's kind of like, oh, just get in Ralph Hasenhüttl to Southampton, great manager, doing a good job, but like, is that the ideal? Like it's not. It just doesn't seem like a great model.
Yet Sean Dyche is hanging in there. He is,
but it shows you, like it depends what Burnley. I'm sure, like there's people in Burnley who'd love to have more sort of ambitious thing, but to be fair, like he's done a fantastic job. I know we're going off the thing, and I know, but like it's just incredible, like that he's just held this team here. And like, geez, I presume somewhat similar when you're growing up. Like I vaguely recall Burnley coming up in the mid noughties once. I think they bet Man United 1-0. I think, I don't know who scored. It might have been Robbie Blake. Anyway, before that, like growing up, like as like a young boy, like I never really heard of Burnley. It didn't, you know what I mean? No. And now there's the fixture, just there. That's down to him.
Yeah, I've been operating off the sort of the 2.5 year rule, where fans start to want more from their club, and you can kind of see it with Graham Potter now, where when they come up to the Premier League, this is more specifically to newly promoted sides. When they come up to the Premier League, staying up the first year is vital. That's all you want. That's all you care about. If you do well, all the better. Then the following year, you want to see a little bit more progression. But halfway through that year, if you are not playing prime, Barcelona or prime Liverpool gegenpress, unbelievable world football without spending a penny, then the fans are going to turn on you. That's sort of why Graham Potter got the job, essentially. I mean, like, Chris Hughton was doing fine with Brighton, but only fine, and they wanted to see progression. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens Graham Potter now with the fans booing him, because his team just simply cannot score, even though they started the season really brightly. We should touch on Barcelona before we finish up with the Champions League. As I said, they were knocked out of the group stages. beaten 3-0 by Bayern Munich. Benfica go through instead of them, 7th in the La Liga. And Xavi is all of a sudden thinking, God, maybe I should have waited to
Yeah.
take this job.
It's it's very interesting. It's hard from the outside in. I suppose you hear so many numbers quoted, but I'm very interested to learn. Like when Graham Hunter was on AM a few weeks ago now, and he talked about it would be. I mean, when you're talking about how much money they owe, I don't know what another X number of million on top of that is, but he did describe it as being like a pretty catastrophic state of affairs if they didn't get out of the group stages, which they now haven't. And it's just very interesting to see what happens. Like it's phenomenal, really, isn't it? Like and it's not that long ago, like when we were watching them specifically under Guardiola as well, and you're like, these can't be stopped. This is just it's too good. Like they're too. It's everything's set up. Oh, they got and I know like a lot of things, and you kind of it's very easy again without looking too far when you hear about like La Masia and stuff, and you're like, oh, geez, they've got this permanent pipeline. This will never stop. They're just going to have these players just like this perpetual thing. This team, they're here forever now. They're here to stay. Just like, I mean, people talk about Man United. God Almighty, this has kind of gone. Yeah. For in terms of fallings from grace, it's pretty bad.
My favorite thing about the week, and I just kind of find it pretty funny, is the fact that Bayern Munich played their full strength side despite already being on 15 points. Like they were through twice already in the group stages. The closest, I think Benfica went through with 9 points potentially after last night. Maybe it might have been even less than that. I think it might have been 8 points. Bayern Munich are on 18 points. they played their full strength side just to knock Barcelona out. And I just wonder whether that was just sheer keep the ball rolling for Bayern Munich, or was it a little bit okay if we knock these out, that lessens the chance of them actually getting any good over the next few months under Xavi if they start to settle down a little bit. But I mean, just looking at their starting lineup, they had Sergio Dest up front with Memphis Depay and Ousmane Dembele. That's a far cry from the years of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar playing up front that year that they scored, was it over 120 goals in a season? I mean, that's realistic where it was. I put my final nail in the coffin for Barcelona when they signed Arturo Vidal, because it was like 40 million for absolutely no reason for a player who was never going to play for them. So yeah, like for our generation, I guess, or people of a certain age, this Barcelona side they've been the go-to, phrase of the standard of football that you can get to if you have the players and the manager. It's, the prime Barcelona under Pep Guardiola, one of the best teams of all time. That ended 2012. That was this decade. Last decade, depending on whether you're counting the years in COVID or not. But like that's where we're at with Barcelona. Within 8-9 years, they've gone from the greatest team of all time to, out of the Champions League in the group stages. So that's how far you can fall in such a short time, which sort of leads into United and Rangnick and sort of almost saving the club from going down a very dark route and, continuing. Obviously, it's not as bad as what Barcelona is in terms of the debt, but in terms of just the continuation of failure after failure after failure with the manager. Ralf Rangnick took over the club last week for a game against Crystal Palace, had them again then for the midweek game against Young Boys in a draw. 11 changes made to that side, obviously not United's strongest team, but curious to get your early thoughts on Rangnick and what he's trying to do at the club.
I think he's an extremely impressive figure, like knowing as much as we can possibly know, and you can really only extrapolate one proper match and whatever, only had a few hours with him. But I just think there's just a good sense of calm. He just kind of seems like he knows what he's doing. But whereas like and you don't want to be too retrospective with things, but like when you're looking at other equally experienced, far more successful managers beforehand, like Van Gaal and Mourinho, there still seemed to be some sort of a little bit of a desperation on their part for something to prove. That this is kind of, that and that kind of, I can translate itself as a bit sort of just antagonistic at times and a little bit, it ultimately didn't work. But I just feel with Rangnick coming in that I like it's yeah, it's very very early days, but he does seem very very calm together. I like the fact that he has a very clear idea of what he wants to do, but the fact that already we kind of see, well, like that's nowhere near as kind of restricted as we might have been led to believe in the build-up. Like it's clearly malleable enough that he will incorporate what's in, with what he has in front of him, and not just try and fit kind of square into circle holes just to suit his system. So I think all of that, geez, I think it's extremely positive for Man United in general. I really, really do, and I think it's I do. I'm already kind of, again, I am thinking already ahead, kind of the summer, and it's like whatever way it goes, and whatever way if he comes or goes, whatever. I really think they're finally on a path. They have a plan, and a plan that will probably work, and a plan that will probably the players I imagine would be happy enough to buy into, because like let's face it as well. I remember just talking about this like to another friend of mine who was a Man United fan, and about like it must be so exciting for some of those players to be playing under a guy, and they'll have known probably not too much about him beforehand, but they'll have done their kind of research and stuff. They'll have read around him. They'll know the links to Klopp and Germany and all these different things. And now they're kind of getting to be a part of something like that. I think it must be very exciting, just from because they are all professionals, and it kind of they want to excel professionally, and to have that kind of proper coaching now, and serious proper coaching and a plan. I imagine it's a very exciting time around the club. I don't know what you've made of them.
Yeah, like, I very much agree with what you're saying there, and I don't like typecasting him because I mean it is unfair to do so, but it does remind me of when Tuchel came into Chelsea, because immediately I remember Tuchel's first press conference after their first game, and he was asked about what he was trying to do, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but he said, okay, we're doing this to shore up this, we're doing this to fix the midfield, and obviously we're conceding way too many goals, so this is going to fix the defense. And within 4 weeks, it was it's fixed, and that's what Chelsea have been doing this year. They don't concede goals. And in Tuchel's press conference after the game, he was asked what he did, and he was like, okay, we played a 4-2-2-2. Here's why we did it. Here's why it was effective. And here's why I'm trying to play this, because it can fit in the different players. And the first thing he said was, obviously, we're conceding too many goals in the counterattack. This will hopefully stop the counterattack. And against Crystal Palace, it was very effective. So immediately he's identified his problem. He's searching for the solution, and he's searching for a solution that works for the players that he's got at his disposal. So clarity of thinking is what I would put it down to. And I think it should be an exciting time for United, and hopefully it does work out for them. It may not work out for them. It could, fall flat in his face in like 6 or 7 weeks after certain players start kicking up a fuss again, or dressing room drama happens again. But you never know what happens with United. It might actually all click into place. He has brought in two people into the club, which is an interesting one, because we did hear that it was going to be 2 appointments. Sasha Lenz coming in from RB Leipzig, a previous employee at Leipzig under Rangnick. He's a sports psychologist, and Chris Armas coming in as the replacement for Michael Carrick as assistant boss. Armas was a head coach of New York Red Bulls. He took over from Jesse March, who he had worked under previously, and he obviously has worked with Rangnick as well, because it all came under his bubble when he was in charge of all the RB sort of, I don't know what you call them, franchises, I guess. The psychology element is an interesting one. What's your general thoughts on sports psychology and bringing a psychologist into this dressing room?
I mean, I find it hard. I would find it hard for anyone to argue against the positive impact it can have. It would seem like, I know, like one of the most pronounced kind of ones in Irish sport recently has obviously been Caroline Currid in with the Limerick Hurlers. And again, some people question, well, what does she actually do or whatever else? But, I've never heard any of those players speak out about her in anything but the most glowing terms. And there always is a kind of a sort of a mysterious element to it. Like you never actually, like you're just saying there with explaining the tactics, no one actually explains what it is that's going on. And I like, that's kind of always like, well, okay, how is this happening? But then you kind of look, it's like, right, well, She's been with Limerick here. She worked with Paul O'Connell, who spoke glowingly about her. She worked with Tipperary hurlers when they won, I think in 2010. She's worked with the Dublin footballers when they won. She worked with Tyrone footballers when they won in All Ireland. Like, so you're like, well, is it a fluke? Is things so? I mean, my kind of thoughts of this, I don't understand enough about what they do day to day, but it can't hurt. Like, it literally, it's a positive thing. And I'm sure with all these things, it always seems to be the case that no one's going to force you to talk if you don't want to talk, but just that the option is there. And God knows as well, like for a lot of those players, that, like if you consider it, and we do overestimate it because it is such or underestimate it because it's such a unique world that those kind of players inhabit. But like, imagine that's their workplace, and just the upheaval of the last few years. Like, everyone's obviously had upheaval with COVID, but like, we were like, if you think someone like Luke Shaw, and he's been there since I think 2014-15, and Van Gaal was his first manager. Now think of the journey Luke Shaw has been on in 6 years at Man United. And it's like, it could be great for someone to just go down and it's like, just have a chat and just kind of lay out what goals do you want? What do you want to set? What's your aim for being here? Because so much at Man United seems to have been ad hoc that it would make sense, I think, to bring someone in who can help players and maybe staff and coaches, I presume everyone, kind of just organize their lives a little bit better and within whatever the general framework that's going to be brought about by Rangnick himself, presumably. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I'm wondering, does anyone have kind of a measured reason for thinking it would be a bad idea?
No. Well, I think people have a general cynicism towards sports psychology because they see it sort of as a voodoo that can't actually be proven, which I totally get. I understand it. But also, we did a whoop series here in Off the Ball with loads of top level athletes from Ireland, Conor Myler and Conor Murray, Katie McCabe, Fintan McCarthy, all them. And we talked about recovery and food and hydration, everything they do to get ready, and psychology was part of it as well. But one of the most interesting parts of it was when I was speaking to the experts on recovery and the science behind everything. And they basically said that if the athlete thinks that it works, then it works. It doesn't matter say, for example, the hydrotherapy, that can't be proven in any real way to have actual benefits to recovery. But if the athlete believes that helps, then it almost works as a placebo, and it does help. So that's basically how I look at the psychology element as well. People can say, "Oh, you can't prove that anything it works." Well, like if the athlete believes that it works and they feel better for doing it, then that can only have a positive impact on their play. So like that's where I sort of view it, that like it's sort of like what you said, there's actually no harm that can come from this. If the athletes, if they don't buy into it, they don't buy into it. But if they do and it helps them and it makes them feel better, then it can only have a plus side.
And everyone won't buy into it. But like, it's the same thing in day-to-day life when people talk about, I know it's a slightly different thing, but when people talk about going to see, with like therapy as well, like just if for people like, I know it's a broader thing when you're talking about your mental health, like, which is essentially what it's coming down to. And I suppose, some people don't need that. Some people do need that. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't work one way or another, but like, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. And like, there's always resistance. Like it was so interesting as well, watching back ahead of time. One of this, he was giving some sort of talk at a Coach's Voice event, Rangnick was. And he was talking again about like goals coming from set pieces, and it's like whatever it was, 30% of goals come from set pieces or whatever, conceded or whatever it was. And it's like, well, it would make sense if you work 30% of your time should be spent working on set pieces. Like that kind of makes sense. And you're like, well, nobody does that. And then you think, oh, geez, Klopp and Liverpool brought in that fella, the throw-in expert, and it's like a throw-in expert, and you're like, it seems so kind of, it's very sort of, well, what difference? What could really happen from a throw-in? You're just getting the game restarted. You're like, okay, we'll peel it back. So you think of the same thing with like when it comes to that sort of psychology front of it, like, geez, if it helps one player, if it helps anyone, like if it helps the coaches, it might well just be for Rangnick. He might find it comforting to have someone around there. So like, you know, where everyone talked about, oh, Ferguson was a fantastic psychologist. Well, he was and he wasn't. He was a fantastic psychologist while he needed you. And he didn't really, you know, like Keane's 50 and he's still pretty bitter about how all that kind of his United career ended. And it's like, how is the psychology there? So yeah, I think it can only be a good thing, man. I think it is positive. And I think, again, it just seems to me at the very base, it seems a very grown up thing to do, which is something's been rare at United.
And again, this will ultimately come down to whether it's a success or not.
Yeah.
If United do well, then it'll be an athletic piece about this guy and how much he changed things. And then if he doesn't do well, it'll be about the overcoaching within the system and getting complicated and everything like that. That's just how it goes in the world of football. That is where we'll leave you off, Arthur, because coming up after the break, we're talking to Adam Pope from the BBC about Leeds United, their struggles this year, and a potential takeover from the 49ers as well in the NFL. So, Arthur, thanks very much for this evening.
Spot on. Cheers.